All right, so our research actually is done mainly with two students, Semyon Bulavinov and Nikita Masuk, and myself. We actually did only part of the research that we planned for, and we gave it the name Prehistorical Rituals in the Digital Era. However, it's not limited to rituals. It's also valid for whatever knowledge we have from the past that we want to disseminate into the future. And I'm going to tell you the story of how we tried to come up with hypotheses, because we were on a journey of trying to find the topic and the design for this particular project to fit in with the project. We started from the dissemination culture theory, where, of course, we have this kind of main phases of a diffusion, dissemination, implementation, and knowledge utilization. And the diffusion phase, it has to have the first person who initiates the knowledge. When it comes to Norse mythology, of course, that is back in the past. And the dissemination comes after the diffusion phase, where people try to throw versions of that particular piece of knowledge or practice or idea, whatever it is that they want to disseminate into the future, variation of it, and then that particular pool of knowledge, stable pool of knowledge, gets disseminated further, and it starts spreading into other strata, using appropriate and available channels. And I'm actually using two words here, appropriate and available, because they're quite different. When we use the available channel, it means that I only have something at hand, and I'm going to use whatever it is at hand, but I'm not going through a process of selecting the appropriate channel of disseminating that particular idea or practice or whatever it is. And the third phase is the implementation and the use of that particular knowledge or practice that has real impact on people's life. And it may even reach policies. And with Norse mythology, of course, we've got, as Janne actually mentioned about those particular practices and the commodification of a mythology, we have a lot of policies that actually touch those particular practices. Now, that is just the theory of cultural dissemination. And of course, now this is visible in its full version when we have an idea or a practice that is initiated within a culture and then disseminating within the same culture further on through time, using those historical artifacts, museums, whatever institutional network that is formed throughout time. But of course, now, right now we are in the digital era. So we communicate beyond the original point of formation of that particular knowledge or practice. And the institutional network has an important role in disseminating cultural and implementing knowledge, because it helps with those particular functions that evaluate what kind of knowledge and practices are going to be transmitted further. They select them, they validate it using scientific or whatever other methods. And they also create the means to preserve them, to present them, and how to propagate them further within the same culture or outside it. Yeah. And as I said, in the digital era, we have now the means of appropriating ideas and practices that come from cultures with whom we had no particular historical contact, physical one. So that particular infrastructure of disseminating those cultural items, the cultural knowledge, don't exist physically within the new land that has digital access to that knowledge. And this is where the intersection of the Internet of Things and the cultural dissemination of information comes in, because they have three important roles of communicating that knowledge, computing it, which means that I'm going to transmit, I'm going to analyze, and that altered view of that information is going to be propagated further, because information and knowledge is dynamic. and also a function of storage. Historically, those cultures within which certain cultural movements originated, they have physical storage of those movements. But those particular digital storage of that culture exists now, available for other people outside the physical land where that particular knowledge originated. So this is how we arrived at the research question. What is the role of the Internet of Things? And by this we selected, social platform in disseminating knowledge and rituals that have no institutional network in a specific culture. And we chose Romania, for one thing, because I'm Romanian and I have a lot of background and I know the culture, and because it has no connection whatsoever with Norse mythology. And it has also its own strong cultural value that is rooted in religion, the Orthodox Christian religion. So, of course, for Norse mythology, we know that's the premise of our research question. There is no institutional infrastructure in Romania for Norse mythology values or rituals or beliefs, but there is a strong institutional network for religion, for religious beliefs and ritual. So this is how we set up the research question, for which, based on the literature, we set the hypothesis that when we are going to search through social media platforms, we are going to find more posts that contain Romanian language for keywords that are specific to Romanian culture than we would find for the keywords that are specific to Norse mythology, even if we search those keywords for Norse mythology in Romanian language. Then a subsequent hypothesis was that we're still going to find posts in Romanian language present among the results for the Romanian cultural-specific keywords, but in English language, because those cultural values are so strong that are going to be found even in the search results for those keywords in English language. And because we know how social media works as well, we hypothesized that we are going to find a lot of quantitative and qualitative differences between the research findings among the coders. And to test those hypotheses, we set the design. We chose 39, there were originally 40, by then we discarded one. 39 Norse mythology-specific keywords that we use here throughout the results as NM Norse mythology. I gave a couple of examples there, and two that are specific to Romanian culture. We run the searches for all keywords in both categories, in both Romanian and English language, and on two platforms, on TikTok and Twitter. We had 3 coders for the purpose of triangulation, but also to test hypotheses 2 and 3. And we collected data for variables that were the number of posts in a search file captured by the extensor zsumer, the languages that were present in the posts, the keyword category, which was Norse mythology or culture specific, and the keyword language, which was Romanian or English. So we had a lot of searches, 3 coders that did this particular 59 searches in both languages, and it was time extensive, the whole search. This is a procedure basically, and who was mainly responsible for each phase of it. Literature review and the hypothesis setting and the design were basically in my charge. The data collection using 4CAT and zSumer on the 2 platforms was saved on a shared spreadsheet on G Drive. And Semyon and Nikita were coders with me, so I was coder 1, Semyon was coder 3, and Nikita was coder 2. The data coding was done in SPSS, so I set up the coding scheme and they coded those variables based on the coding scheme that I set up. I entered them in SPSS and I did the I did the data analysis using descriptive and inferential statistics in SPSS, the graphical representation, and with Semyon, who actually built himself script in Python to check the similarity for the quality differences between the search results. Was everything that I described was actually part of a data analysis. Now the results. So for these particular two, the first two hypotheses, this is just one graph from a long range of graphs, but we can see here that the percentage of keywords, you can see that for the cultural specific words, this is the red one, this is for X, and the blue one is for TikTok. But these are the cultural specific keywords returns in Romanian language, and these are the ones in English. And these are the one for Norse mythology in Romanian language. So definitely we can see that we found more results in the category for culture specific in Romanian language than for Norse mythology in Romanian language for both platforms. And then we've got, we actually dug a little bit deeper. We didn't really settle for this. This is percentage-wise for the findings, but coded by the language that we found in the post. So you can see that we've got here in blue the posts that are mainly in Romanian or only in Romanian. The red ones are the ones that contain some posts in Romanian but are not necessarily in Romanian like the main language. And the green one are the posts, the files that contain no Romanian at all, right? And we can see that for the Norse mythology keywords, the ones that don't contain Romanian are so many. This is for Twitter. Again, for the ones that are culture specific, we can see that we find more that contain or are mainly in Romanian and less that contain no Romanian at all. And the explanation for having posts in Romanian language that don't contain Romanian was because the language is so similar with to Italian or Spanish. And in Romania, there are not so many users on Twitter or on TikTok. So when we actually searched the word that was very similar to the Italian word or Spanish word, we actually got findings in Spanish or in Italian mainly. Yeah. So this is, again, another, this is for TikTok. So the same trend for TikTok. Which actually proves our hypothesis, the first hypothesis. However, if we actually look a little bit deeper, we can see here even the average post count per keyword category, which is Norse mythology or culture specific, and per language, because we had the Romanian language, the English language. There's some words that actually, when written in Romanian, they were written in the same ways as Italian. For example, paganism. Yeah? Even if it's paganism, you're going to have the same word as in English, right? So, of course, or Odin. Names of gods, that would have been, an international one. So it was basically part of a two categories. So we can see that in Romanian, we are going to have an average post count higher for the culture-specific ones, and it's here, than we would for the Norse mythology ones that are here. So it's definitely showing us that for those particular words that are related to the values that have an infrastructure, physical infrastructure in Romania, we're going to find more posts, and we're going to find more posts that contain Romanian language. The dissemination of culture basically relies on that physical infrastructure, on the connection with the past. We actually, I played a little bit with the graphs as well. So we have some differences between platforms, and that actually brings some information about the quality of the data that we find on social platforms. So the differences between the algorithms that those particular platforms use when you create an account, even if we had new accounts. So both Simeon and Nikita, they didn't have an account on Twitter or TikTok. Myself either. So they were new accounts. Those algorithms as users are practically inexistent. Yeah? Nevertheless, we found differences in numbers and quality of those posts for each category. So I'm not going to bother you with all the figures here, but needless to say, basically both H1A and B were proven. Here is another graph that shows not only in the whole pool of posts that we are going to find more findings for the culture-specific keywords in Romanian, but for those particular posts that include Romanian language. So even if we narrow the group on which we run this particular search, we still find that there are more posts that contain Romanian for key-specific, culture-specific keywords than for the Norse mythology ones. Yeah, and these are these here in Romanian, and these are in English. There were differences again between coders. We can see that coder 2 always had an opposite trend with coder 1 and coder 3, which was very interesting. We couldn't explain it somehow rationally. We are for coder 2. We are missing some information on Twitter because he was blocked at some point. Yeah, on Twitter, I was blocked sometime during the search near the end. Because we had the 39 keywords for Norse mythology and then the 24 culture-specific Romanian keywords. And I was blocked just at the beginning of the culture-specific Romanian words. And then 2 weeks later, because that actually took a very long time to search and download all the files. It's a really extensive process, exhausting. After 2 weeks, I tried again. And somehow Twitter forgave me, so I completed the search on Twitter. Yeah? Because otherwise because I couldn't really download and really count the number of posts in the files, so I would just estimate the search is higher than 50, higher than 100, higher than 20. But when I completed it, I could actually put an exact number against it, against the keyword. So now we go to the second hypothesis that show definitely that there are differences in numbers and then in quality per coder. So you can see here the average post count per coder. They don't have some relation between them. We can see coder 2 is always against coder 1 and coder 3. The difference between the Norse mythology posts in my search was different than Simeon's, which are here. Yeah? So there are huge differences that I couldn't really account for having new accounts. So that algorithm that customizes the user experience definitely has to have something else built in, so that it would return this kind of differences in numbers. But then we are going to see also in quality. This is differences only for those posts that contain Romanian language. Again, the same trend, coder 2 goes against coder 1 and coder 3, but the differences between coder 1 and coder 3 are a little bit smaller. These are the differences for the English language keywords per each category. So again, huge differences between coder 1 and coder 3. And now here you've got the, for each keyword that we've got from 1 to 59, you've got here all categories, so culture-specific and Norse mythology, but the English keyword on TikTok. Yeah? So you can see there is, if you actually look at the big picture, there is a trend, yeah? But there are differences in particular areas. So that actually indicates that there is a call algorithm that goes into a common pool of knowledge, but then the user experience yeah, really creates a different output in the end file. Yeah. Here are just for the, this is on X, and of course now coder 2 is missing because coder 2 was blocked totally. Yeah, so here there are plenty and huge differences between myself and Semyon. And at the end here, we've got those particular keywords that I searched at the end when they unblocked me. So for some reason, I found for some keywords over 2,000 posts. So I would stand there and scroll down for hours until at the end of the search. And it was really interesting that, for example, one keyword or combination, it was shaman drum altar or something like this. We had, in Romanian is altar, shaman drum, altar, shaman drum is English, and shaman drum altar is in Romanian. So Semyon basically found 200 and something for the English version and 0 for a Romanian version, which was just basically one word put in front of the other in a different, with a different order, the same combination but different order of words. So huge differences that we can't really explain otherwise than just the social platforms algorithm that plays with the output. Again, these are different other combinations that we've got, this is for the Romanian keywords on TikTok, all three coders are here. You can see here, one is going, coder 2 is going down and the others are actually up here, coder 1, nothing, the others are going down. But somehow, within the big picture, we've got basically a common trend. And that was visible later on in the inferential statistics. So I'm not going to bother you, you can actually follow the line and see that there are clear differences, quantitative differences between those findings. And I'm going to go to the third, to the inferential statistics. And I ran the Levine's test for equality of variances between the posts of coder 2 and coder 3, actually all three. And I found that coder 2 and coder 3 actually had a statistical significant difference between those findings. For some reason, they followed the same trend, because it was statistically significant, the difference between their post numbers or post count. It wasn't significant for myself and Simeon or for myself and Nikita. But between Nikita and Simeon, that difference was significant. So because between myself and Semyon, I found that it's not significant, I ran another non-parametric test here, but still there was no significance found statistically. So even if later on, here, we found that there are correlations between the post counts between coders, but stronger between Semyon and Nikita, weaker between myself and Semyon. What was also interesting, after we did the language coding, myself and Semyon did that. Nikita didn't have enough time to do it when I started running the tests, so that was not included in the analysis. But there was a medium and positive correlation between the codes of the languages that were found in the posts. So whenever he was coding a particular post, we had 1 to 9 codes, mainly Romanian, mainly Czech, but we didn't do it for Czech, mainly English, no, only Romanian, only Czech, only English, then mainly Romanian, mainly Czech, mainly English, and then we had it for another Latin country, because as I said, the Romanian terms were very similar to the Italian and Spanish ones, so we coded those that we found in another Latin country, we coded separately, and then we had another code for findings that we found, majority of findings that we found in languages that were of another religion, Christian religion, but it wasn't majority. Yeah, it wasn't. For example, some of those related to religion were in Indonesian. Yeah. So that alone, when we found out that actually, there is this kind of mix of languages there, we had to create a code number for that particular combination of languages. And as I said, there is a medium significant correlation between the languages that I found in my results and semions, for the same key results for each key term in each language. And these are the ones that these are the results from SPSS, just if anyone is interested, with also the descriptive one, the independent sample test for Levin's test, the non-parametric test as well. And now, so those are the differences on the quantitative side. But we also said, okay, so fine, we have different numbers, but maybe the content is actually more or less similar. Yeah? Well, it's not so at all. We ran, using the script built by Semyon, we ran for each key term in each language, so that means 118 searches, both Semyon and myself. Yeah? We ran that script, and we found the average similarity for the keywords in Romanian was 43 for TikTok, and 54% for the English terms, and on Twitter, the opposite trend, a higher percentage for the Romanian keywords, and 33% for the English terms. So not that high, yeah? Because even if we actually had a number which was close to each other, like in the range of 200, 300 posts, still, they wouldn't overlap so much in content. Yeah. And it's also interesting that, for example, if you look at the users of TikTok and Instagram, they overlap, 80% of them are actually common on both platforms. Now, if you have TikTok, it's 80% chance that you're going to have also Twitter. So we've got, again, this is a different breakdown of the similarity percentages that taking into account also the category, but also the language for each platform. And we see the smallest number of similarity. This is for the English cultural specific words. Now, so those that are related to Romanian values, to religion mainly, but in English searched, when we compare, especially on Twitter, we compare them, they do have a very small overlap. Now, how do we interpret this? Well, of course, if we look at the numbers, we can see, yeah, all your hypotheses are confirmed, but of course, there are limitations because, first of all, we are missing some data from coded 2. And we can't really generalize, we can't really have, that much confidence that the results are going to be valid for other keywords. So we really need to extend the range of keywords and also the range of platforms. However, if we look at the results that we've got that suggest that what we set as hypothesis A, 1A and YB are true, then that shows how in our digital era cultural dissemination works. And it does really try to transmit those past experiences only and more accurately if we have that physical infrastructure and that physical contact with a culture to begin with. And we looked at some of the files as well, and it was striking, for example, when I looked at the file about religion, religia in Romanian and religion in English. That was the most messy file. So much fighting, so much hate. Yeah? It was absolutely unbelievable. Well, but it was striking to me that actually, even in Romanian, yeah, because you would expect only messages, that are aligned with our Christian values, but of course, they are not. They do really come in conflict with those particular values. And because we can confirm, of course, definitely, here there is no doubt, H2 and H3, hypothesis 2 and 3, but there are definitely differences between search results, between coders, and not only between coders, but between the results of the same coders done at different times. So if I'm going to run the same search today, I'm going to get different results. Mm-hmm. Yeah? So that is really striking, because when you're actually running research on platforms like this, yeah, and nowadays social media is a huge site for data collection for researchers. Mm-hmm. So how can we actually trust the reliability of that data if I actually try to replicate this tomorrow, I'm going to get a different result. Yeah? So it shows only a momentary reality, I would say. Mm-hmm. And also what's missing, of course, to look more about how cultural dissemination works on digital era is a qualitative analysis of the content. Mm. That definitely requires the next step to look into those particular posts and see if there are, common themes, if there are, more, let's say, liked or shared users, whatever it is, that content that actually is disseminated the most, yeah, and throughout what time frame, because that also is an important factor in those files. Yeah. Okay. All right. So that's everything for me. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here, and a pleasure to be able to present some of the work I've done. Yeah, thanks. This is not connected to the Norse mythology or the Norse pagan or Neopagan or the heathen material, but I hope that this is somewhat usable because it concerns some of the same things, and I think some of the same challenges are relevant for both the Greek material, which I'm working on, as the Norse or the Neo-Norse or the heathen material. So a common challenge, I think, is that, well, I will be concentrating on the ritual side, concerning the reception of ancient Greek religion for contemporary pagans. And a common challenge for both them and for the researchers is that when it comes to rituals, we know very little about the contents and how they were actually performed in many cases. Some rituals we know a lot about, but others we know little about. So a question is, how do they reconstruct or play out these rituals today, and what kind of strategies are they using to legitimize their choices? I will use cases from 3 different groups, and I'm moving us to North America. So these are North American groups who are concerned with the Greek contemporary Hellenic polytheism, which I would refer to as Hellenismos. And as was the case with Jana's material, there are a lot of different terms used. I've seen both the contemporary Hellenic polytheism, but also Hellenismos, and I will use that just for convenience, really. Yeah, so, but I want to start with the ritual itself. So this is a quote from Catherine Bell from a very influential book on ritual, where she says she talks about what she calls the new model of ritual, which according to her is primarily a medium of expression, a special type of language suited to what it is there to express, namely internal, spiritual, emotional resources tied to our true identities, but frequently unknown and undeveloped. The new paradigm is directed more inward than outward, apt to define community and society in terms of the self, rather than the self in terms of the community. So I think we see here a subjective turn, if you can call it that, which she also identifies with many of the Neopagan religions that were easier to spot, or they were more from the mid-1990s, I think. So she connected with Neopagan movements, their focus on the individualism, and the subjective interpretation of their own past. Which is a bit different from Durkheim, I think, and the collective approach to the ritual. And I think we will try to return to this, what she says about the medium of expression, which I think is also interesting in this context. So this subjective turn, it fits well, and it fits well with the idea of the Neopagan religion or religions being dogma-free, non-dogmatic, not any canonical texts, and very open for interpretations, as compared to world religions, if you could use that term, such as Christianity. This is a very broad comparison. I think perhaps by looking at the three groups I'm going to look at, we can perhaps nuance this picture a bit. So, Neopaganism. The term itself is often used to refer to traditions and movements that seeks to reconstruct, recreate, or uphold or continue an often pre-Christian religion, which is also tied to some kind of ethnicity, an ethnic group, region, or nation. And the various groups emphasize to varying degrees the practices and beliefs of the past, while simultaneously giving room for personal interpretation and innovation. So there's two different ways of looking at this, as sort of a spectrum, one could say. And it's also the lack of dogma leading to a more individualistic religion or religious outcome. This has been, there's been a lot of theorizing about this, how to understand the various movements and religions. Michael Strimska has suggested a way to categorize different approaches by using a scale, where you have eclecticism, which we talked about earlier today, on one end, and reconstructionism on the other. So eclecticism is more open to using whatever you want and try to build something of your own, while reconstructionism is more trying to look at the sources for what we know about this religion. So these are two extremes on the pole, and you can find various groups on this spectrum. This has been criticized quite a bit because it's very difficult to put individual groups on this scale. And in my experience, many of the groups are actually both, they're both eclectic and reconstructionist. So it's difficult, but we can just have that in the background, I think. I think I should move on. Yes. So I will focus on three groups, as I said, in the North American Hellenismos. This is the term two of the groups use themselves. And here, as we will see, I will go through each group individually. They have very different approaches to how they interpret texts and how they use these texts in the reconstruction of their rituals. So this is to sum up in advance, in a way. These are the three groups: the Hellenic gods, which is more orthodox than the two other groups. They see themselves as continuing a living tradition from antiquity, while a lion is somewhere in between the two groups here. As they select and interpret various texts both ancient and modern, as we will see. But they also combine this with personal knowledge. And Hellenian, which will be the last one I look at, which is more open to borrow from other traditions as well, such as Wicca, for example. This is a common definition of Hellenismos as the traditional pre-Christian polytheistic religion of ancient Hellas, or Greece, reconstructed in the modern world. This is from Drew Campbell's book from 2000, which is often used. It is difficult to say when this Hellenismos, when the groups were established. Actually, the first pagan religion registered in the US is the Church of Aphrodite, so that's sort of connected to this, and that was quite early. I think it was in the 1930s, actually, so it goes way back. But this version and these groups are groups that emerge, we see them from the mid-1990s, corresponding to the rise of the mainstream internet, and making it easier for people to communicate, because it's not many of these. The groups here, they range between 25 members and 500 members. But as Janne said, it's really difficult to count these, especially since many of the members belong to different groups or more than one group, so yeah. But these are the numbers they operate with themselves. So we start with Hellenic gods, which I said was the more orthodox group. This is actually a website run by a guy called Kallimakos, and it's very detailed. I recommend the site. It's really interesting, very rich on text and explanations, and how they understand the theology of Hellenismos. And according to Kallimakos, he was trained in Greece. So he learned, got his knowledge from believers in Greece who claimed to have been upholding a living tradition, going back to antiquity. So this was a tradition, according to him, that has been kept secret, especially after the rise of Christianity, which forced the followers to go underground, keep the secret, and transfer the knowledge from generation to generation. But he says that you can see glimpses of this in the Renaissance, among the Platonists in the Renaissance texts, where you catch glimpses of these, this knowledge and this tradition. I said that this is more orthodox, and this is because they rely on a very specific type of texts from antiquity, the Orphic texts. So they have more, this is the equivalent to our Bible, as he said, the Orphic texts. And they use a specific theogony, but also the Orphic hymns. And the Orphic hymns is something that more groups also use, but these are considered the most important ones. He also emphasized that this is secret knowledge, much of this. So when I asked him about the rituals, and what he can tell me about those, he says that our ritual consists entirely of Orphic hymns. They have a certain structure, which I'm not allowed to explain to you in detail. I can tell you certain things, but I can't actually explain to you how we construct a ritual. So this is, it's a bit difficult to gain access to how they do this. So we have this more orthodox group. Now the Elion, which is a bit newer, I think, founded in 2004. Kallimakos talked to me about this group, and he said that this was a splinter group from Hellenion, which we will hear about later, because members here, they thought that Hellenion was too open in their approaches to the text. So this is quite large groups. They have approximately 500 members, most of them in North America, but also members in Europe. And they say that they are not reconstructionists. They reject that term because they say it's impossible to reconstruct how the rituals were actually done. So the aim of Elion, it's not reconstructionist, it's not eclectic either, but it's trying to carry on the spirit of ancient practice, as one of the members told me, rather than reconstructing a religion exactly the way things happened. So when it comes to rituals, they have more than 70 rituals on the website. And they follow a very strict structure. They're quite similar to each other. There are a number of texts that you start with. You have a middle section with certain texts, and then an end section with certain texts. But there are a lot of gaps in between these texts, and these are unique for each ritual. So the example I have here, this is the ritual for the city Dionysia, the Dionysia Taastica. And this is interesting because it has an introduction. And here we see that one of the scholars, Richard Seaford, he's introduced as a professor emeritus at the University of Exeter, a leading scholar, and some of his biography. And they use the text from his book on Dionysus from 2006, and one of his articles on the Dionysiac theatre and its connection to religion, as a preparation to go into ritual. So the introduction ends with these words: "We will honor Dionysus throughout the city Dionysia by reading and studying the Bacchae by Euripides, in light of the work of Richard Seaford." So here we see a very interesting mix of going back to the ancient texts themselves, which is Euripides, the tragedy Bacchae, which concerns Dionysus, and but also the perspectives of Richard Seaford, a researcher. This is important, but also there is another aspect to the creation of ritual in Elion, and this is what is referred to as UPG, which stands for Unverified Personal Gnosis. So this is so this is knowledge that you just get from somewhere, and it's unverified because it's very personal. So this quote is quite long, but I think it's a good example of how this could work. This is one of the senior members of Elion who has written many of the rituals, and he tries to explain how this could work. It was a beautiful night. The moon was at the zenith. It was midnight, and the moon was very high. Full moon, mid-month. And I went out and I was offering prayers to the goddesses. It was just a beautiful night. And when I got to Hecate, I said, "How can I honor you in a modern way?" So this is also important to adapt to the modern context. Next morning I woke up and I knew what I should do. So there's no explanation of what happens there, but she just knows. So I used Hesiod's Theogony for Artemis. So Hesiod's Theogony is an ancient text. And I used that as a kind of a template, and I developed a whole ritual for Dayton, which, of course, is at the end of the month, the last day of every ancient month at the new moon. So I went to a friend, and because there's food involved, and in ancient times, the food would be taken to the statue of Hecate of the crossroads, seeking protection for travelers and protection for the household, etc. So those people who are in need would help themselves to food. So I said to a woman, unspecified woman, "What's the best charity that would help a family in need, needy families, of food?" So she gave me the name of the local charity that helps needy families, especially children. So there's a mix of ancient texts and personal communication from I presume, Hecate. And this is also used and adapted to a modern context. So a wide variety of texts, personal gnosis, you create a ritual, and you use that. Yeah. The last group, Hellenion, was founded in 1999 and had its first meeting on yahoo.com, so this is a very digital phenomenon. It's underlined this. This is, these pictures are taken from the website, and it's actually from the Skiros ritual, which is today. It's celebrated today. Here also I talked to one of the senior members about how they construct their rituals and what kind of, how they legitimize the use of text. She said, so I've occasionally used excerpts from comedies or dramas, completely out of context, but again, the words being poetry, you know, like all poetry, have the power to take us out of our ordinary experience of life into a different kind of experience. And I find that just, again, the sound of the words, even to modern Greek speakers, you know, they can't just assume they know what it's about, so it requires us to think and stop and really pay attention. So the person I spoke to here was very concerned about the use of Greek language, and as you can see here, she finds a kind of a poetic quality by just reciting in Greece. This was not the case for all members of Hellenion, because as she says, most of the members don't speak Greek. It's not important for them in North America, so they use translations. And this is fine. This is fine for her. This is important for her to use the Greek language, and you can find rituals on YouTube, which she has recorded, where she speaks in ancient Greek and so on. This is not the norm. The majority don't do that. Also, she says that there are a lot of chapters in Hellenion. They had also around 150 members, and they're spread out to different cities in North America. And she compared this to the ancient city-states of Greece, where they had their own versions of rituals, their own ritual calendars, and this was fine. So there's no need to have a uniform set of rituals which everybody has to use. Instead, she saw this as an advantage, as we see here. The advantage of looking at one of their rituals, and she's referring to a ritual in Philadelphia, I think, from the chapter there, is to see if there's anything you might like to borrow. Oh, I really like the way they did that. We can use that. That made sense. And the ancient texts support it. I see how they got there. I think I will incorporate that next time I do this ritual. So this is very typical. But not only that, but this is also close to what I asked you about, Jana, about other tradition and how they are used. So I asked this member, and as I did the others, if they mix and how eclectic they actually are when they try to recreate both the rituals but also the theology. And as she says, some of them, I'm sure you've encountered other groups, other people. There are people who add mix. You mentioned Vicar before, and there are some of our followers who do mix the two traditions. And what we tell them is, you know, you're welcome to do so. We don't comment, we don't judge, we don't condemn unless you're doing anything wrong. And what this wrong is, she didn't elaborate on, but it's a quite open approach to using things from other traditions. Okay, so to try to sum up, we have the Hellenic gods, which we admittedly don't know too much about, but they emphasize a very strict tradition, which is kept alive for 2,000 years, more than 2,000 years, which have specific texts they rely on. And there was no mention of any personal gnosis, as we see in Elion and also Hellenian. Elion and Hellenian, they use texts as guidelines or signposts. And it was really interesting to hear you say, Jan, about how they try to come home to a spiritual home. Yes. So this is quite close to how they look at it, both Elion and Hellenian, actually. This is a quote which says something about how they approach the ancient texts, I believe. There's a surprising amount of reliance on ancient authors because really it's our mind. It's what we mine for information and inspiration and as a compass for, are we on the right path? And this path is toward something which they refer to as the truth. And from what I gather from interviews with both the Elion and Hellenian, it's more that the texts from the ancient texts are the ancient Greeks. They try to find ways to get closer to the gods. So the ancient texts are not the truth in itself, but they are signposts that could point towards the truth. And many of those I talked to, they look at modern texts in the same way. So we can also take this role, try to find new signposts, try to approach the truth in new ways, and also borrow things from other traditions. So this is why I've included this picture of a medicine wheel in North America, because one of the books written by a follower of Hellenismos used this as an example. We could use the holy sites of other traditions because there's some truth there. That's something pointing us towards this truth we are all trying to get closer to in this endless struggle or quest for truth. And returning to Bell and her characterization of the new mode of ritual as a mode of expression, when we look at how the rituals are constructed in this way, in my opinion, it blurs the borders between the ritual and prayer in a way. So it becomes very personal how you construct a ritual, just in the same way as a prayer is very personal, and you can include whatever you like or whatever you feel is right. So I will end now, and I end with this quote, which I thought was interesting in a way. This is from the 2006 version of Margot Adler's classic text from 1979. So she's written this in 2006, and she said, the secret to that neo-paganism in general seems to have learned over the past 35 years is this: if the methods for creating such experience have been lost, the way to find them again is to create them again. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
This headline could also be reformulated as what happens to Norse gods and symbols when they end up in various mystical speculations in Southeast Europe. 2 cases, or 2 countries, 1 million cases. The cases are Albania and Romania, which are somehow comparable because they're post-communist. They had the most isolationist communist regimes, extremely atheist, both of them, very ethno-nationalist versions of communism, and not Slavic. So their identity, heritage roots are a little bit different from like everything going on in the Slavic belt among them. So let's see. I think maybe the best, easiest way to introduce this very complex discourse is to tell you about the first time I heard about it. It was in North Albania in 2003, and I was talking to a middle-aged man, gentleman, a local intellectual. And he heard I was Norwegian, and he was so enthusiastic. He said, "Oh, we're siblings." I thought, yeah, that is very friendly. That's a family word. It's nice. You know, bro, sister. Nice. That was not what he meant. I would, 20 years later, come to categorize this kind of discourse as esoteric, occult linguistics, rejected knowledge, hyperdiffusionism, etiological myths, and all the myths in the... Yeah, let's see. He was a local mystic in a way. A seer. He could see things that not everyone could see, especially not me in 2003. So, here we go. Oh, you're from Norway, huh? Yes. Yes. That was a proof of his theory, which went somehow as follows. He explained to me that, what's the Norwegian word for dry? Tørr? Because tørr is terra in the Latin translation of the Bible, which is the same as the Albanian word for dry, which is thar, dried, which means terra. That was Albanian land in the Bible already, connected to Vikings. Atlantis is just off the Albanian coast. This is related to what is it? Where the ancestors of the Albanians once lived. Cool. Then they moved to Egypt and built the pyramids. And some of them went up to Scandinavia and became the glorious, proud Vikings. And there were some druids. The Druids are also, that's also Albanian language and Albanian religion, because Dru in Albanian means wood, and the Druids were in the woods. So this is logic of this discourse. And the final proof, he was so happy. He said, Kent is a popular Swedish name, isn't it? Kent. I said, yeah. Kent, yeah? Yes. Because Swedish Kent is named, is a name of an ancient Proto-Albanian Illyrian king, Gent. And the seat of King Gent was in Shkodra, where we were. So later, I seen a million different forms of this particular ethno-speculation, new agey, new national mythology. We can, conspiracy theories. There are many perspectives, you can call it many things. The point is that Albanian intellectuals and common people, having a coffee, they try to find proof that everything is Albanian. And that this Albanian mystical glue can include everything they want from all corners of the world. Buddha can be Albanian, Vikings can be Albanian, Sanskrit is Albanian, of course. So that's a basic plot. And there's a hidden reality, the hidden truth that only Albanian speakers can see and know. So by being an Albanian speaker, you already have some kind of charisma. You are truth-seeking. You have a mission for the rest of humanity to restore this ancient glory. This comes in so many versions, so let's look at some of them. So it has a very strong linguistic component, and it's also hyper-diffusionist, so all civilizations in the world, everything that is valuable, everything you like, everything you want to promote, it's coming from Albania. The beginnings of this particular discourse started to Albanianize the Greek gods, Then the Egyptian gods followed, you know, proving that they spoke Albanian. Italy is Albanian, Roman emperors are Albanian, and so on. So I haven't seen any complete overview of the Old Norse gods as Albanians, but there's a little bit here and there, and I'll try to give a glimpse into how they are reinterpreting and reconstructing the ancient Norse religion. Wait. So this is they usually call this fantastic, undocumented prehistorical people the Pelasgians from Homer, very mythical people. And if you replace Pelasgians with Aryans, you kind of have an idea about the racial and ethnic component of this mythology. So everything can become Albanian in different ways. It's very strong in pop culture and in very popular TV programs about UFOs, ghosts, everything. This is an Albanian migrant who worked as a magician in Italy, and then he made this sort of mystical TV show which is occultism and frequencies and everything. And sometimes he proves that the Norse pantheon is Norwegian. Like he has some, you know, etymological speculations about, basically Albanianizing Old Norse language and the gods. It's a fantasy fact, interesting curiosity program. People think it's a serious history. This is there is this sort of appeal to science through this whole discourse. They think it's serious in the European studies, serious historiography. All the books of this kind are usually placed in psychology, history, linguistics sections in Albanian bookshops. The, let's say, most prominent, prolific, productive representatives of this discourse, they are sometimes awarded. They receive awards for president and, you know, the National Library. So it seems that a lot of people believe this is like genuine scholarly activity. So they have the practical side, or almost ritual side of it, is literary and social in the sense that they gather and read each other's texts and prove, include new ethnic traditions and new continents in the mix. So this, over the years, this conference, they have Albanianized Mexico and currently also Scandinavia in different ways. This is actually the leader of one of these associations. He studied in Prague. I just found out. He's a geologist. So his take on this Nordic Norse connection is through petroglyphs. So he's been to a mining town south of Oslo called Kongsberg, where there are some inscriptions that probably date from the 19th century. And that proves that the whole, also the Northern Europe was Albanian or Pelasgian. Everything makes sense in Albanian. The thing is that you need a special symbolic attitude to see that it is Albanian. So their activity is to like prove technically that, oh yeah, this becomes this if you only, you know, magic wand and it becomes Albanian. So he and his wife, they tap into Norwegian pseudoscience by a prominent Norwegian pseudoscientist to prove that the runes were Minoan, or I think, yes. So ancient Norway was part of the, yeah.
Of Epics.
Yeah, well, basically all the Mediterranean culture had the Norwegian origins, and it's complicated, but he has a very alternative approach to runes. That Mr. Pesa is standing on the shoulder of a giant, so he's building, you know, further Albanianizing the Minoan thesis of Ortun. He has also discovered, I think it's he's also discovered Atlantis in Sweden. Yeah, so this is the Minoan civilization. So Scandinavia is Minoan, and Minoan is code for Pelasgian, so Albanian. Okay. Yes. Here's another version. This is an engineer from Albania who lives in Norway. Norwegian is her second language, and she is very inspired by this older Albanian mysticist to prove that Sanskrit and Chinese is Albanian, and who is building on Fridtjof Capra's symbolic algorithms that can turn anything into anything through, you know, if you just look at it with the third eye. And she is very excited about the Norse heritage and Norway and everything Norwegian, so she has Albanianized the saga literature, some of it. And the basic idea of all these people is that Albanian is not only the original language of mankind, it's also a cosmic language. So it's a code to understand the mysteries of the universe, and, you know, understanding the true essence and unity of everything. So it's deeply into, yeah, New Age and various esoteric sports. So she, since she speaks Norwegian, and Norwegian has, you know, Ibsen and famous mathematicians and all that, that means that we are, Norwegian, so it's close to Albanian, because it's kind of the closest you get to the mystical universal language. Not as good as Albanian, but it's purer than the others. Okay, so. And she seems to see herself as this old Norse seers, the Volusbo. So they're modern prophets. And yeah, well, she connects it to the Midgard serpent, and she also she uses one of our old colleagues, Norse religion expert Gro Steinsland, as proof, her modern translation of the Norse literature. So let's move to Romania. It's quite different. You have a whole lot of Norse New Age things going on there too, but I had a look at the organized, relatively organized new religious movements. So they have some Odinism, and they have Åsatru, and they're all part of this umbrella pagan dawn. They seem to get it from Australia. And a lot of these Romanian Neopagans seem to originate in Transylvania. Welcome Wicca, welcome werewolves, everything. Yes. So the Odinists, they are, well, the quickest version of describing them is that they're very progressive, very anti-racist, very inclusivist, very woke in many ways. So it's a multicultural celebration. They identify with, you know, new religious movements from Haiti, from all over the world. It's all about bringing people together and live in harmony with nature, and know yourself, and, you know, be progressive. They have some rituals. I don't know much about it, but yeah. So it's organized, unlike me. And they are also into this more intellectual, academic study of Norse traditions. But they do their own take, but they don't. Yeah, they have their own take on it, but a lot of it is like it's closer, let's say, closer to the original in many ways. So they promote old sagas and Edda, all this. So it's very recognizable in a way, but it's not still. They have Yule celebrations together with ancient Mediterranean gods, their temple, and again very multicultural. They have de-Christianized Christmas, which is like very typical because, as they say, which is probably a fact that it was a Christianization of winter holidays, pre-Christian winter holidays. So, as said, they're very inclusivist. They're allied with the Pride the alphabet, rainbow alphabet in Romania. And this is an important part of their identity because they want civic liberties and protection of minorities, and they feel under attack in many ways. Which, sorry, right. It seems like the visual material is from Australia, I think. Yeah, so I'll come back to this minority rights because, again, we end up in context immediately. So they want to combat discrimination of all, minority groups and all that. They want to be friendly and not aggressive, and they're a bit reluctant to call it religion, which is not unusual. But, okay, so let's look at these minorities at risk, because here's an important communist context. They were very upset a couple of years ago because of this journalist, Christoyo. He's an old secret police officer, and he was, speaking very pejoratively about pagans in Romania. He said that this Valhalla is fake, and so they were very insulted. And it is related to the fact that he was a Securitate officer, probably. So they feel attacked by the society at large. So they had lots of public statements trying to clarify, the correct representation of Odinism in Romania. But the backstory here is, of course, communist persecution of religion in Romania. And they wrote about pagan Holocaust in Romania, which is not unusual in Southeast Europe because they have a tendency to call everything Holocaust and genocide. So I'm not completely sure what they're talking about, but it seems that they're referring to this decrees against mysticism, which are probably some of the decrees to close and to curtail the rights of the religious communities. So there are many, many layers of secrecy here. So they're saying that there was, in secrecy, there was a repressed group of pagans that were hiding and considered illegal, and they were persecuted. They called it left hand. Yes, left hand path. It sounds a little bit anachronistic, but it is possible that there were some occultists or something. It was very risky dealing with anything that was not, strictly within the limits. So again, it goes back to these common ideas of protecting what they consider valuable and feeling safe, and not being attacked by everyone. It's very different from this Albanian discourse, but again, it is about this feeling that everyone is going to take everything from us. It's not so strange that they are a little bit paranoid. They have all the historical reasons to be. And we see that, again, in how they deal with also the Norse material. I will stop talking soon. I have no idea how much I have left. Oh. Yes, I think this is something which is important to remember. Of course, the Norse influence or Norse inspiration is mainly post-communist. But they have a long and good story of reconstructing national identities by reference to ancestry and real and fictional peoples in antiquity, living in various territories. It really comes with a turbulent history of the Balkans and all the border changes, and cultural complexity and all this. So both in Romania, Ceausescu, he's social engineering, and he was trying to make this new Romanian man based on ideas of pre-Christian Dacians and Romans. So here's King Decebal, the Dacian king, in the background. Similar.
Vlad Cepeš on the right.
that is Stefan Chomar,
Așa.
Stefan the Brave.
Nicolae Ceausescu Cepeš.
No, but there were, I think, descendants maybe of Cepes.
Cepes, okay.
They donated the painting.
Okay.
These guys, Natalia and Nicolae Gatnotsky Cepes, they donated the painting.
From 78.
Okay.
So, because it has been the nationalism in the Balkans has been the romantic ethnic nationalism, and it's really about defending your rights. Who was here first? We are best. Who has the right not to be kicked out from the country or harassed? A parallel in Albania, they glorify the Illyrians. Apparently, Enver Hoxha wanted the Pelasgians to be the ancestors of the Albanians, but since it's a mythical people, it was a little bit difficult to make museums with artifacts. So they decided on the Illyrians that were living in the region. Yeah. I'm going to run through some other expressions. Runes are going in all directions and into all kinds of sub-discourses and sub-purposes. You have clearly Norse-oriented rune magic. They are considered powerful and magical. It doesn't click. Wait. Yes, you have horoscope runes. You see the iconography where it, in which direction. Zodiac. Protection. Well, it's not too modern like runes for protection. This is, in a way, very original. It's a healing, wellness, spiritual, relax. There's also some health things. And then we have the Wicca take on runes. I think that's going to explode in Transylvania when they discover the traditional witches. You have other new Wiccan runes like female, male runes, and they go into crystal magic. And then you have the black metal scene. I couldn't find so much direct Norse I have no clue about black metal or the black metal scene in Romania, but there's a little bit here and there. I want to show it to Jana to check something. So this is a band from Timișoara that is, they celebrate the local pagan culture, but it seems to be also inspired by some Nordic things. They are very sweet. These are modern mystics. They like it's meditation and healing and crystals and with Harry Potter, finding yourself.
Sweet.
And they recreate pagan traditions, but they reminded me of Norwegian things, and I just wanted to show you. If I was one of these Albanians who would prove that everything is Norwegian or has Norwegian origins, I would probably do something like this. Superficial similarities. There is an element of borealism in, I can't pronounce it, in it. They are mentioning the north, sorcerers from the north, alluding to shamans and Vålesbo, maybe all this. There is some mystical truth in the north. It's ancient. Another hypothesis I have is that the more, let's say, more warrior-oriented Dacian new religious movements also somehow Vikingify the Dacian revival, comparing the Dacian gods to Thor and Odin and so on. And they have an obsession with wolves, but that is not Norse influenced necessarily, because God knows they have a lot more wolves in Romania than in Norway, and they also have cold and snow and all that. So, but there is some indirect Norse aesthetical influence through the black metal culture. I'm not sure. It reminds me of Assassin's Creed, like reconstructions of Norse mythology. Okay. Yeah. This is Norse mythology. And it looks exactly like a lot of the Romanian black metal Dacian. Yeah, so I mean, the iconography is more Assassin's Creed than the illustrations that we are used to grew up with. Yeah, I can just stop talking when I have to. Good. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, good. Okay, so first of all, I'd like to thank Giuseppe for inviting me to come to Prague, and I'd really love to be there. Unfortunately, I've injured my foot, and I'm quite immobile for the coming weeks and months. But fortunately, there are solutions to this in our modern day. So I'll try and participate as well as I can remotely. And just a brief note on my participation later today. I have to leave after this session closes, so I cannot be part of the roundtable. I have a couple of 11-year-olds downstairs who need feeding and who might also abruptly enter the door as I speak. So hopefully they won't come until they are called upon. But also briefly to the topic, as you can see, I've tried editing it for precision, because this is a paper that I originally I've expanded it a bit from a workshop that I attended in the Back to Blood project that was organized this spring, where I tried to say something about sort of the Norwegian legal seen, how the Norwegian law has dealt with the Norse past. And for this seminar, I wanted to expand this scope at least a little bit. I've tried doing that, and I haven't had the time to do it properly, so I had to adjust it a little bit. I wanted to add some international perspectives. I have added some European perspectives, but mostly this is still a very Norwegian and slightly Nordic and slightly European presentation. Thankfully, there's a lot of variation. There's a lot of parallels that can be drawn within the European scene and also across the Nordic countries, and perhaps particularly how sort of Nordic ideals and thoughts on this topic travel across national boundaries. And I'd really love to hear from all of you present how the law deals with the Norse past in your settings, because that's a topic that is something that I know too little about. And I think the field in itself deserves more attention. I know there are some case studies from individual countries that look at how the law has dealt with, also through groups, both in terms of hate speech legislation, in terms of being registered as a religious community, and in terms of cultural heritage. But there's very little comparative work being done, and there's very little, at least that I have seen, that has also sort of tried to approach this from a more systematic and sort of human rights based approach, where we look at the sort of intersections between Norse and also true groups and paganist groups and other minority religions, because I think that's one of the major sort of interpretive frameworks when the law has to deal with unorthodox religious groups in any kind of way. It seeks alternatives, it seeks sort of parallels, it works through analogy. So I think there's a lot of work to be done here, and this is just a very early example of that. And just a quick note also on why someone from my background chooses to do something like this, because as Jana presented my work, this is not exactly my field of specialization. It's actually because working with law and religion for some time, you do come across instances where the law has to deal with questions like the Norse past and also through societies and paganism. And I've been looking for a way in which to sort of systematize my thoughts about this. So this is an early attempt at doing that. So the ambition is that I'll do one sort of paper on the Nordic setting that will be within the sort of back to blood framework, and one larger, more comparative study that sort of feeds into the perspectives in this seminar, which is broader, which looks at Europe in a larger context. Just a brief note on sort of what it means when we talk about sort of legal reception, because I think there's two sort of slightly different but also interrelated ways of going about this. Because if we look at the Norse past, there is a distinctive legal part of that past. And how we receive that, how we think about that, how we understand that in the present also bleeds into and affects how the law, more formally speaking, in terms of statutes, legislation, and case law, how that law understands the Norse past. So I think in order to think anything systematically about the legal reception, we have to think a little bit about how we understand the Norse legal past. And I don't speak then about sort of the legal past in a very strict sense, but in terms of what kinds of norms, rules, and different forms of legalities were actually in place in the Norse, or sort of also through the paganist society. And that's in a very, very loose sense, because that's the way it's being approached. When we talk about this in cultural settings, when we talk about it politically and also socially, it's very often with a very low level of precision. It's very often speaking about sort of the pagan past, the Norse past, in a very, very general sense. And that's for obvious reasons, because we know very little. So knowing very little invites all sorts of speculations. So I think the way we speak about the legal past, the Norse legal past, is important for our legal understanding of what the Norse past should be. So I'll speak a little bit about this first topic first, this question of what the legal past actually is in the way we think about it, because in all honesty, I don't think we can say anything much about what it was actually like. As several presentations today have also hinted at, there's a lot of creativity going around when trying to reconstruct this. And I'd just like to sort of sketch some of the sort of quite polarized versions of what this legal past looked like, at least in the Norwegian setting. And then I'll move on to what is sort of closer to my usual specialization, which is how the law deals with this kind of past in terms particularly of religion. So I'll look a little bit into laws and case law that regulates different aspects drawn from the Norse era. And as I mentioned briefly at the outset, this will be mostly about hate speech law, a little bit about registration of religious communities, what kinds of groups are being recognized, which ones are not being recognized, and on what grounds. And then lastly, about a theme that is developing quite rapidly now, and I think perhaps is the most exciting frontier in this part of the legal reception of the Norse past, which is cultural heritage. And that speaks both to sort of the more immaterial heritage, so how do we sort of configure the Norse past as part of our identity, but also to a very large extent the physical cultural heritage. Who has access? Who determines whether something is sacred or not? You mentioned earlier in the conversation about having access to Acropolis, for instance, to do rituals. And these kinds of questions are emerging in many different settings. And I have a couple of examples from Norway, and I'm sure there are many other examples that could be drawn upon from your own backgrounds. So just briefly on this notion of the Norse legal past. As I mentioned, there is a very limited source material here. We don't know too much about what kinds of rules and norms regulated the Norse society. And we talk about the Norse legal past, we talk mostly about sort of this sort of dividing line between before and after Christianity arrived in Norway. And in earlier historical writing, the topic of Christianization was often presented quite black and white. You had this sort of period before, and then you had a period after. But of course, this is a much more gradual process where this took several centuries and played out very differently in different parts of the Norwegian society. So it's much more a complicated sort of transition from one legal order and over to another, and where many of the rules that remained in place also after society became Christianized were quite clearly drawn from the Norse or pagan or heathen past. So there's a lot of reuse of norms. There's a lot of interaction. There's a lot of sort of reinterpretation. And just one of the sort of many examples of this is the importance of the thing, the sort of assembly, which was in place in medieval society for centuries after Christianization, but also can be traced to well before Christianity arrived in Norway. But we see also, when we talk about this phase, this transition, there's a very polarized perception of what this past that went before Christianization was about. And obviously the older view, which was to view this society as barbaric, unhinged, it was marked by human sacrifice, slavery and bondage, blood revenge, killing of the disabled, the unwanted, and the elderly. So quite sort of stark, pretty sort of bad public image. And of course, many of these items are quite realistic. Many of these things happened. We have traveler descriptions of this. We have archaeological remains. We have various writings originating from this era that sort of testify to the presence of these things, but their prominence, their sort of how widespread they were, for how long they continued, and so on, and not least how many of them actually continued over after Christianity was introduced, are very much up for discussion. And this is, I'd say that this is mostly, it's not an abandoned approach, but it's an abandoned approach to think about it in such a polarized view, as I mentioned earlier, as something that was sort of marked by darkness and a lack of civilization, sort of replaced by the luminosity of Christianity. But then we also have sort of a more recent sort of reception of the Norse past, and I'd like to stress here that I'm not speaking strictly to the legal past, but the past more generally. And several of the presentations earlier today have also hinted at this sort of vision of the Norse society as being sort of this holistic, ecological, sustainable lifestyle. And here again, we have the thing as being sort of lifted as this proto-democratic legal order, something that inspired later versions of democracy. So there's quite a stark sort of polarity between these two ways of thinking about the legal past. Most accounts will likely operate somewhere in between, but you also find some of the more sort of extreme versions. And just a very few examples here. This is from the celebration that we recently had in Norway of what is colloquially known as the thing at Moster, which is in the western part of Norway. And there's this idea that 1,000 years ago exactly, this year, in 1024, King Olav, our patron saint of Norway, introduced Christianity at this thing. And this is where the Christian law was introduced. And you can see this sort of celebratory narrative sort of painted through the figures from the one which is marked by a warrior society with Viking raids and helmets, and you have spears, you have arrows, you have axes, and so on. And then society progressively sort of develops towards our modern age. And Christianity is what fuels this development, this movement away from sort of barbaric darkness and towards enlightened civilization. And it's actually quite notable how some of the speeches, some of the celebrations that have been sort of organized in commemorating this jubilee have really portrayed the Norse legal past as a really dark age, where people didn't have any rights, women were sort of treated very badly, and there were all these sort of versions of the dark heathen past that are actually quite surprising, considering sort of how outdated this sort of polarized black and white view is in historiography. Then you have this more holistic sort of nature-oriented paganist view of sort of everything as interconnected. This is a painting from the 19th century, this sort of romanticist sort of critique against the materialist Christianity. And we find this very sort of strongly represented in sort of this environmental movement. There's this critique emerging in the 1960s and 1970s in the early environmentalist movement that Christianity is actually the culprit behind the extensive use of Earth's resources, and we should return to this kind of nature spirituality. Paganism is actually the only ecologically sustainable religious worldview that could actually help society develop in a more sort of ecologically sustainable way. So those are sort of some of the opposites that we're seeing. And another sort of more sort of specifically legal sort of remnant, some kind of reinterpretation and certainly a reimagination of what the Viking law actually was, are these more sort of souvenir-derived versions of what Viking laws actually are. And if you read this from the left to the right, you will see that on the left you have a Viking law that is very, very sort of progressive, very holistic, very concerned with sort of interactions between human beings as being marked by reciprocity, about sort of taking care of one another. So this is sort of the hippie version of the Viking law. Whereas in the middle, you have a much more sort of Jordan Peterson, take care of your own life kind of rules, which are the Viking laws that inspire you to be brave and aggressive, you have to be prepared, a good merchant, and keep the camp in order. And the one in the middle is the one that is by far, at least in Norway, the most popular. This is a very popular souvenir item, printed both as posters, as T-shirts, as greeting cards, and whatever. And I've been trying to find sort of the origins of this one in the middle, in particular, because it's so widespread. I haven't found any sort of smoking gun, and I'd like to hear from you if you know exactly where this is drawn from. I've looked in Håvamål and some of the other sort of Norse sources, but I haven't really found the origin, and it'll be interesting to see if any of you have suggestions there. And on the right, you have what many of you will recognize as a fully blown, more right-wing, racist creed, which is the 9 Noble Virtues, which originates in the US in the sort of Odinist, racist, heathen movement, which has a lot of, you see some of the same sort of virtues and values on the right as you see in the middle. So these are some of the reimaginations and ideas of what the Viking law actually was. So what we're represented with, and this transitions gradually into the legal regulation of the Norse past, because whenever law has to deal with a new and unfamiliar phenomenon, it cannot do so solely relying upon legal precedent and sort of technical expert pronunciations or evidence of more sort of tangible kinds. It also has to rely upon the status of what it is reviewing in erstwhile society. And the period when sort of Norwegian law and also Nordic and I think to some extent European laws really starts to engage with the Norse past is in the 1990s. This is when we start talking about this more systematically because we have more groups that are organized, they present themselves in society, and they become part of society in a way that makes the law aware of them and also that the law needs to deal with them. And you have a stark sort of this polarity that I've been hinting at is very much present. And this is just something I threw together to sort of illustrate the broad sort of chasm, the big divide between sort of this positive version, which you find at the top, which from your top left is like Eriksson discovering Europe and a celebrated painting from the 19th century and sort of romantic revival of Norwegian nationalism. In the middle, you have what the Norwegian participants will recognize as the ferries or the rafts or whatever you want to call them from the opening ceremony at Lillehammer, which was like a celebration of this sort of Norse past and this reenactment of how the world was recreated anew. So there was these sort of beautiful or sort of idealistic views of the Norse past. And on the top right, you have Bifrost, which is the largest, which doesn't mean it's very large, but it's still the largest also community in Norway, which has been very active in distancing themselves from the more sort of darker right-wing associations created by the Norse past in Norwegian public sphere. So this is from the Pride Parade a few years back, where it says that heathens are also for diversity. So this is a very sort of embracing all kinds of diversity, both in terms of sexuality and others. At the bottom, on the other hand, you see items that have been part of Norwegian public spheres and discussions throughout from the 90s and up to the present. Not as a big topic, but as a recurring topic. And on your bottom left, you see Varg Vikernes as a famous musician, mostly famous for killing his band friend Even Årsheim in 1993 and served a sentence for almost 20 years for this. He was a self-proclaimed Satanist, and Satanism occupied a large part of sort of Norwegian understandings and sort of impressions of what this era could bring to our society today in this early 90s phase. He later became an Odinist in prison and came out as an Åsatruer in his own sort of private version, and has been sort of an active and vocal figure sort of on the fringe far right. He has left Norway, but still has a sort of a presence as sort of one of the bad right-wing sort of entrepreneurs of sort of reimagining the Norse past. In the middle, you have Tore Tvedt, who organized this very small but still quite visually present and also embraced by the news media organization called Vigrid, which is openly racist. He has been prosecuted numerous times, as I'll come back to, for hate speech against minorities. And they have this very shallow sort of Norse image of being sort of followers of Odin and so on. But it's not really connected to Odinism in the US at all. It's a completely sort of something he created in his own bedroom, more or less, with a very, very, very small following, but he has still sort of managed to become quite visible in Norwegian public sphere discussions about the Norse past. So to many, at least in the 1990s, this was a real worry among the police, among others, that this was actually becoming something that youth was drawn towards. And it's important to note that in Norway, there was a small sort of neo-Nazi scene at this time, very much smaller than Sweden, for instance, but still there were racist-inspired murders by neo-Nazis. So this was a real sort of threat of fear that there would be sort of some kind of negative influences by people who were inspired by this dark version of what the Norse past was all about. And on the bottom right, you see the logo of the Nordic resistance movement, which is an openly racist right-wing political organization that is present in all the Nordic countries. It's quite small in Norway. It's much larger in Sweden. It was recently banned in Finland after one of their members committed a murder, but they have sort of respawned in another form under a different name. And they're not very large, but they embrace very much this sort of Norse imagery. They use runes, they have uniforms and do marches and stuff, and it's very sort of Nazi inspired. So these are important markers and important backgrounds for understanding how the law deals with the Norse past. So I see that time is running away here, but I'll try and be brief about the actual legal reception of the Norse past, because now I've been speaking mostly to sort of this this reservoir, these resources that the law and lawmakers and people who work legally have to deal with when dealing with the Norse past. So I'll speak just a little bit about law and religion and the general tendencies that mark this relationship. I'll present to you the very, very limited, but still quite interesting case law from the European Court of Human Rights. And then I'll give some examples from legislation and case law in Norway relating to hate speech, legislation of religious communities, and cultural heritage. So I spoke briefly earlier about how the law tends to sort of work by analogy. And legal reception always mirrors and interacts with social, cultural, and political undercurrents. So if one religion is more or less popular in society, that will also be mirrored by the law. We recently had a case against the Jehovah's Witnesses who lost their status as a registered religious community in Norway. And I would argue quite strongly that the reason that the state could do this was because this is a group that many are already skeptical towards. I'm not saying that's the only reason, but it's an important part of it. So this comes into how legal professionals, whatever law they have to deal with, review and understand the religious communities that they are faced with. And secondly, and related to this first point, laws on religion are created mostly in order to maintain and manage majority religions. So basically all religious legal frameworks we have about religious communities are created to manage majority religion, but they are later adjusted to deal with minority religions. So the way that minority religions like Norse religious communities will be dealt with has a lot to do with how the majority religion is regulated. So if the majority religion has a lot of benefits, then the state is obliged, at least under human rights law, to provide similar or comparable benefits to minority religions. So that's one of the sort of interesting differences between different European countries, because countries like Norway and Denmark and Sweden offer quite a lot of privileges to their majority religions, which also means that they need to give the same privileges to their minority religions. And then it becomes also quite an interesting exercise for authorities to review who are the eligible minority religions. Should all have funding, even though they are racist or even though they are do not respect gender diversity and so on. So the more benefits you get, the harder it becomes to become one of those religions that are recognized. Another point is that the regulatory techniques, the ones that I mentioned earlier, and principles about law, about religion and law, tend to travel frequently across national boundaries. And one of the conduits for this is the European Court of Human Rights. So if there is a decision made on a small or unusual religion at that level, that will have repercussions for other European countries as well. And finally, as I've hinted at before, when you create a Norse religious group in a European country somewhere, the way that the law deals with this will tend to merge with the legal reception of other minority religious traditions. And this is also why we find a lot of Norse groups and also other minority groups collaborating together in order to sort of get the benefits they are entitled to through the legal framework. So briefly about the European Court of Human Rights, I'd like to hear from you if you know about other cases, but I've only found 3 sort of important cases. And by far the most important one is quite recent, and I think most of you will be quite familiar with it. It's the ancient Baltic Religious Association Romuva versus Lithuania, which was decided in 2021. And this was a case where the Lithuanian authorities refused to recognize this religious community as a religious community, and the state lost on all accounts. And the items that were listed by the states as against registration was that this association had links to Russia, that there was not really anything called the Baltic Faith of Remuva, and also, interestingly, that recognizing this would have implications for Christian Lithuania. And the court denied all of these arguments, and in particular the one about the existence of the Baltic Faith, because this is not something that a state can decide upon.
1 minute, Helge. Sorry, 1 minute.
Okay, sorry. Okay, I'll speed up. So this is one of the things that the state cannot really do. And then secondly, also through Felagid versus Iceland, which was a question about funding, whether also through should have the similar amount of funding as the state church. And this was more sort of a negative decision for the Oslo-truers, because the court decided that even though the state church received more benefits, that was okay as long as the Oslo-truers were not hindered from performing their religious traditions. And the final one is a mere side note, which was about a British prison who failed to register Wiccan beliefs and prisoner. And he lost his case because it wasn't really material to his imprisonment. And I have 1 minute, and I think I have like 5-6 slides, so I'll just run through them. So very briefly, when it comes to hate speech legislation, we have several cases in Norway where Norse-inspired groups have been penalized for using for hate speech, but because of this, symbols associated with Norse groups have also been suggested prohibited. So far, this has not happened, and the Oslo-truer groups in Norway are divided on whether or not that is a good thing to do. So that is the hate speech cases. I can't say more about that. I want to briefly address the question of registration, and to cite Mikael Strimska's article from about the Oslo-truer Felagid in Iceland in 2000, where the Oslo-truer recognized that having a faith was important in order to gain legal recognition. So also through the Oslo-truer Felagid that I mentioned earlier, which lost the case against Iceland in 2012, is actually a creation of official government regulations. They created this in order to become recognized. They had to come up with an umbrella that would connect all the things that they believed in. So they created Oslo-truer, which I think is an interesting process. And I guess my time is up, but I'll just briefly mention that in Norway, the Oslo-truer society Bifrost that I mentioned earlier were denied registration in 1998 because they believed in black magic, which was negative. The Nordic paganists were denied registration in 2017 because they didn't have specific gods nor a clear-cut confession. And the Church of Pain, which was actually present at the Midgardsblot that Janne was talking about, was denied registration because they believe in pain as a conduit to sort of the universal soul, but the authorities felt that pain is just a physical experience and you don't really have a concrete group of adherents, so you're not allowed to be religion. And it's important to note that the Oslo-truer society was finally recognized, so were the paganists, but the Church of Pain case is still pending. And then I don't have time to go through the cultural heritage stuff, so thank you.
If you want, okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Helge.